July 21st, 1995, otherwise known as the day when Nintendo would first release what could be considered one of the earliest forms of virtual reality to the world in the form of the Virtual Boy. It was a jarring device, to say the least. The console was equipped with a 32-bit RISC chip, making it Nintendo's first 32-bit display, a controller to operate the Z-axis, and of course, the display itself, which consisted of two 384 by 224 pixel 2-bit monochrome red screens, running at 50.27 Hz, all for the price of $179.95, or the equivalent of $310 today. Well, 41 cents included, I guess. Due to the limitations of the Virtual Boy, like the small monotone display, steep costs, bulky body, and lack of developer support, the console was very restricting in what it could do, and instead of providing a groundbreaking third-dimensional experience, it instead was a system that made the few who did purchase it not only get proverbial and literal headaches, but wonder why they even bought it in the first place. The console was a commercial failure, being panned pretty much universally from both critics and consumers alike, with only 770,000 units being sold, and with only a handful of games supporting it, the Virtual Boy was discontinued within less than a year of its release. Even though it had the title of being the world's first gaming device to provide that unique experience of virtual reality, the Virtual Boy was a far cry from the fantasy that Nintendo wanted to provide. It's been 25 years since 1995, however, and of course, virtual reality has made massive leaps since then. August 1st, 2012. A Kickstarter would be initiated by an independent company called Oculus, with the plan of making a VR headset that could achieve the fantasy of yesteryear of experiencing a 3D immersion experience right in the middle of home. The campaign was extremely successful, with around 10,000 contributors raising almost $2.5 million. The company would go on to develop various prototypes of their headset over the years, which they called the Oculus Rift, and during that time they would be purchased by Facebook for $2 billion. Needless to say, Oculus was doing well for themselves, and on March 25, 2016, nearly 4 years from when they first started their Kickstarter, first batch of Oculus Rifts entered in the homes of consumers. It's been 8 years now since Oculus' initial Kickstarter campaign, and the world of VR has been rapidly expanding since then. And with more companies coming out with their own VR headsets and premium software, with the most recent and significant addition to the annals of VR history probably being the Oculus Quest 2, and I suppose Half-Life Alyx, the once distant mirage of the common man being able to immerse into the world of virtual reality has been starting to finally blossom, which leads into ultimately the point of this video. August 24th, 2020. A package will arrive during the middle of the COVID-19 pandemic quarantine at the house of one bum-like digital communications major, me. Inside the box was an Oculus Quest that I had gotten the opportunity to borrow for a VR class, and outside of having one brief experience playing a lewd anime game, a family-friendly educational game on how to save orphanages, this was my first time truly getting to dive into virtual reality. So with that being said, I want to talk about that. Now, although I'm going to analyze and articulate my experiences of VR, this is by no means a review. More than enough people have done that, and you don't need my 2 cents in that capacity. Instead, I'll try and take the more analytical and artsy-fartsy version of things and give you what little I can as someone who has never really experienced virtual reality before. And to do that, I will be splitting up my analysis into 2 categories, starting with what I will call grounded immersive experiences, which I define as virtual reality experiences that do pull you in but still require you to suspend some level of disbelief. To some degree, that can be said about all VR experiences, given that the medium is still in its early infancy. But to be more specific, I think of games like Moss or Audio Trip as quick examples where it's more about selling you on a unique gaming experience rather than one focused solely or mainly on the immersion aspect itself. What I found to be interesting about playing these games is that despite knowing that I had a headset on, there was still this sense of interactivity that a more traditional and comparative interactive medium like video games just still can't quite capture. And I think it was when I was playing Moss that I understood a bit of what that aspect was. You see, for pretty much any other type of video game, the main way a person connects to that game is through the controls they use and by association in their hands. I mean, that's pretty obvious. But this has been the status quo for a while now, and although a game can be extremely responsive and captivating, it does still have its limitations. I think of horror games as the best example of this, where the player can become so invested that instead of the relationship being simply a person playing a game, they become so emotionally absorbed into it that no longer do they see and play just a game, but rather command the flow of a small digital world where virtual horror becomes rather real. This deconnection and mastery of the game, however, can just as easily change in the opposite direction. When the game amps up its fear and causes the player to be consumed by it to the point of resorting to cowering in their own emotions, in a way, that results in the game playing them for a moment, which then briefly breaks that connection and resets the emotional buildup of tension, usually by the player jumping out of their seat, retreating from their controller, or even turning away completely from the screen to take a moment of respite, escaping the flow of illusion in a sense. With VR, however, that thin and easily escapable connection is strengthened immensely. Instead of just your hands, it's potentially your whole body, but it's especially the inclusion of your head into the experience that really makes VR stand out. Instead of controlling everything from the tips of your fingers, you now have the motion of your head to alleviate the amount of responsibility your hands have to do. And instead of simply removing your hands from the controllers to detach from playing, you would have to remove a securely strapped headset that restricts your eyes from the real world, and until you take it off, you're stuck in there. These two reasons, which may sound small, I believe are what truly separate and create the world of difference when talking about VR and interactive mediums like video games, because in a way, it forces the user to become more integrated into the activity, unlike anything we've seen before. The other classification of virtual reality experience, which has a lot of parallels to grounded immersive experiences, I'll call compelling immersive experiences. You see, unlike grounded immersive experiences, the center objective of this type of program is to get the user sucked into a convincing impression-based sensation, rather than providing an entertainment-centric one. Some examples of this that I tried would be National Geographic VR, Ocean Rift, and technically kinda sorta things like VR Chat or the more safe for work version Altspace and A Fisherman's Tale, but I'll get back to those later. The way these experiences are achieved, based off of my experience with these programs, is by attempting to emulate some aspect of life in some way. In National Geographic Explorer VR, for example, you play the role as a photographer who is getting pictures of the next issue of National Geographic, and as such, will have to pull your emulated camera from your emulated waist and start taking emulated pictures while traversing through the environments it has to offer. Ocean Rift is similar in goal to National Geographic Explorer VR, in that it focuses on exploring the depths of the ocean below to swim amongst various sea creatures to learn about them. These two games are the most traditional sense of the compelling immersive experience, because the goal of them is to have the user experience emulated aspects of the real world from their home. But make no mistake, this type of experience can still happen in more unrealistic settings. As defined by the Encyclopedia of Multimedia, the goal of immersive VR is to completely immerse the user inside the computer-generated world, to give the impression to the user that he/she has stepped inside the synthetic world, to project VR just in front of the eyes and allow the users to focus on display without distraction. Going back to this idea of the unrealistic being immersive just in different, more subtle ways, I look to social games like VR Chat and Altspace, where although the environment and people you see are very fictional to the real world, its core experience, social interaction, is compelling enough to strip all of the virtual noise away and just leave you submerged regardless. I remember having a conversation with someone who looked like a character from an anime, and despite how unrealistic he looked, we were having a genuine and real conversation. No longer was I thinking about the environment, no longer was I thinking about how ridiculous I or he looked, but instead, the conversation itself. Before ending this whole thing, there was one game I played that I think touches on a lot of the various aspects throughout this video. A Fisherman's Tale. For context, A Fisherman's Tale is a short game where you are a doll with a faded memory that initially is trying to go to the top of a lighthouse in order to help a stranded ship. What really makes this game stand out, however, is its gameplay, where you have a miniature that is an exact copy of the room you are in, including yourself, and depending on how you interact with the miniature, it will affect the room that you're in. For example, I had a magazine that was on top of a table, and I decided to put it on top of the open miniature, blocking off what would be the ceiling and my access to it. When I then looked up at the actual ceiling of the room I was in, all I could see was the massive cover of the magazine I had just placed down. A Fisherman's Tale is an example of what's called a non-Euclidean game, and as much as I would love to talk in depth about it, this video already has a lot going on, and there are tons of good videos out there that talk about this topic already. DigiDigger has a good video on it that explains what they are and how they work, so I'd go check that out. The reason why I bring up such a unique game like A Fisherman's Tale in the first place is because although it has many of the traits of a grounded immersive experience, in that it's a very unrealistic game that isn't really trying to simulate the real world, I would argue that it shares aspects of a compelling immersive experience as well, in that interacting in that game's unique world and playing by its bizarre non-Euclidean rules is so engaging that it is both subtle and exemplary of what makes virtual reality such a truly unique and immersive medium in its own right in the first place. Thanks for watching.